How do you get to drawings like this? I'm going to tell you, and it's going to sound like a series of steps that you've already started to learn. So in this lesson, we're going to look at how the skills you've already been building can be combined into your figure drawing process. My name's Kenzo, this is Love Life Drawing, and this video is part of Figuary, where we team up with Croquis Cafe, who provide beautiful life drawing references for you to draw every day of February, and you can apply the lessons that you learn from these tutorials. We're studying the drawings of our friend Andy, also known as Vynillus, on Instagram. Check him out on Instagram and follow him there. You remember when Mr. Miyagi got Daniel's son to wash his cars and paint his house, and Daniel was upset because he wanted to learn karate? Well, it turned out he was learning the muscle memory he needed for karate defense the whole time. And I love the Karate Kid, and I really wish at this point we could have a moment like this, where it all just magically works because of the exercises we've been doing. But unfortunately, in real life, Daniel-san wouldn't have won the All Valley tournament within a few months of training. So probably at this point, you won't suddenly be able to magically draw like a master, but in a slower and more frustrating way, the ideas and exercises we've been working on will lead to these types of skills. So let's see how. So just like we've worked on, the most important thing before you start drawing is that your eyes pick up on what the large masses of the figure are doing. And eventually it'd be good to be able to visualize the kind of rib cage egg-shaped form and the sort of boxy pelvis form more clearly. But for right now, I'm really just talking about dividing the torso into three broad sections, the ones that we looked at in the earlier anatomy lesson in this series. Notice if the ribcage angle is different to the angle across the pelvis, and that will create a squash side and a stretch side. You also want to see how rotated these forms are to your eyes. So in other words, are you seeing more of one side than the other? What is the distance from the center line to each edge? You then want to see if the rib cage and pelvis sections are tilted forward relative to your eyes or tilted back relative to your eyes. And throughout all of this, hopefully your eyes are picking up on some big picture proportions and alignment. So what's lining up vertically and horizontally. So you're really basically finding the block-in lines that we were drawing in week 1 of Figuary. Being good at this is a big chunk of the life drawing journey, and it does take a long time and lots of practice. Eventually, you're going to be able to see those ideas without having to draw them all out. In this demo, you can see how those same observations feed into what Andy ends up drawing. So the edges of the ribcage section versus the midsection and pelvis, the importance of the center line to explain the rotation, the cross contour line here. Let's say you've practiced your skills from the block-in to the point you're pretty confident with seeing all those relationships. You can forego drawing out all those straight lines and instead find the big curves of the figure. When you're seeing some of these demos, note that Andy might go to like step 5 or something on the head and still be on step 1 in the torso, but each area is still built up in that same sequence, from simple to complex, from big lines and big shapes to smaller lines and smaller shapes. It might seem like the block-in exercise and the big curves exercise are separate skill sets, but they aren't. So to put down this curve, you need to see the start and end points and how far away those points should be. In other words, straight lines. So to be confident with your curves, you need to be confident with your straight lines. Your curves will be partly based on those straight lines, but also you're now looking for asymmetry or counterbalances in the curves. It's useful to have a vocabulary of curves that you commonly see in the figure ready to go, to give yourself a head start in the process. So here's a set of curves that you should have ready to go and which hopefully you're already familiar with. So the obvious one, we talked about it already. I'm repeating it again. Squash and stretch relationship created by the angle difference between the ribcage and the pelvis. You're probably going to use one big curve on the stretch side, maybe 2 or 3 on the squash side. Things are going to taper down to the waist and then they'll often come out again from there. You'll see a similar thing with the front and the back of the torso when viewed from the side or from a 3/4 angle. So the squash and stretch is super common and you're going to find it in a lot of poses, and it's going to be a bit of a centerpiece in a lot of your drawings. It doesn't have to be dynamic poses either, by the way. So on a recent live session, check out our live sessions if you haven't seen them. The recordings are on our Vimeo channel. I brought up this group of bored cuers. You know, they look bored, they look annoyed, they're not being dynamic, their clothes are obscuring their shapes. But notice the ones where the weight is on one leg. That's pushing up one side of the pelvis, and the rib cage angle counteracts that to create a squash and stretch. Some other people are standing at an angle to us, so we're seeing more of one side than the other. And we know that naturally from the side, the rib cage is going to be more tilted back, the pelvis more tilted forward, which again creates kind of a stretch side on the front and a squash side on the back. So you're going to see that kind of relationship in so many poses in the torso. When you're looking at the front of a straight leg, you'll find a C-shaped curve on the outside of the thigh, another one counterbalancing that on the inside of the knee, and then again on the outside of the calf, all offset from each other. If you go to the side of the leg enough, if you go round to the side enough, the curves you're seeing are going to change a bit. So you're going to see a big S-shaped curve down the front of the leg if it's straight. If the leg is more bent, that S-shaped curve might break into two C curves. Sometimes it could be more useful to see a C curve on the front of the thigh and also on the back of the calf set against straight lines on the other side. So it's kind of case by case what you want to use. Overall with legs, you have a tapering down, wide at the top to narrow down at the ankle. The tapering is just as important as those curves. You want to capture that tapering. An arm at rest or bent slightly is often going to have a large C-shaped curve to it overall. If the arm is bent, that C-shaped curve might break into two curves, break at the elbow. Again, the arm tapers down overall from the shoulder down to the wrist. The more you start finding these common patterns, the quicker you'll be in finding the curves you need. So those are some standard curves, but you're also going to be able to find interesting curves unique to the pose that you're looking at. And as you can see, a lot of experience and skill goes into those early, quick, simple curves, and they're really important to the rest of the drawing being successful. Now it's time to develop the shapes of the drawing. Andy makes a lot of use of shadow shapes. You'll see a lot of variation in how much light is hitting different areas of the figure. There's almost no light here. This is in shadow, but it's lighter than the other shadow areas. This is a sort of transition from dark to light. At the end of the day, when you squint at the reference, you just want to be able to see the big shapes that are being hit by light and the big areas that are not being hit by light. Those are your big shapes, and you want to cut through all the detail to create big shapes with simple edges. This box looks 3D even though it's a 2D image because it's really clearly telling you about the 3 dimensions. Here's a dimension, here's a dimension, here's a dimension. You want to be really clear about the dimensions of your figure too. And remember, we want to merge shadow areas into larger shape with really simple edges. Edges with C-shaped curves, straight lines, maybe some S-shaped curves. We don't want a lot of sharp angles and thin lines to capture lots of little details. We want chunky shapes that tell us big ideas. We're going to look at shadows and light more in the final Figuary lesson. So with the shapes established, you can try losing details in the shadow areas especially. Letting it all be fairly flat because it's all in dark. You'll notice that the shadow areas are often even allowed to fall back to being as simple as the background. That's something that Andy does quite often in his drawings. He also has a lot of overall directionality to his marks. So you can see the overall swooping direction of the marks that he uses, and he brings that out in the background and into the shadow shapes on the figure too. And then the areas in light can have a little bit more detail, but notice that it's very subtle. There are no strong marks here. It's all kept lighter than the shadow areas. It's a very gentle, subtle variation in values. You don't want to confuse the overall value structure with really strong marks in the light areas. The initial big shapes of light and dark are still the visual priority. Now we're just playing around within the light areas. The information that Andy is adding within the light areas are informed by a solid understanding of anatomy. So for steps 1 to 4, you would only need really simple anatomical knowledge. And it's just that you need to be really good with that simple anatomy to get all the way to step 4. For then refining things and adding these little finishing touches, that is where the more advanced anatomy will be useful. In Andy's quick sketches, he's not really even using that advanced anatomical knowledge that much at all. So it's really just the basics that you need when it comes to anatomy. So there it is, kind of an overview of a complete figure drawing process in 5 steps, many of which you've already started to train yourself in. If you're struggling, I think go back to that block-in exercise because that's the heart of so much of the rest of the skills. I hope that you've enjoyed this one. The next one is going to be about shading and light and shadow shapes, which is going to be fun. Guys, I really recommend picking up our guide to life drawing success. It's about the mindset and the learning process that's going to lead you to becoming as good at drawing as you want to be. And you can sign up to it along with our awesome newsletter with the link in the description below. It is time for you to do the most important thing in Figuary, which is draw the beautiful Croquis Cafe poses. So check out the link below, the Figuary link, for all the information you need about that, and I'll see you in the next video.